You ever wonder how couples in the past, got their alone time? We imagine candle-lit rooms, soft music, maybe some romantic poetry. But here's the truth: for most of history, privacy was a luxury that didn't exist. Whole families shared a single room, sometimes even the same bed. Walls, paper-thin, curtains, mostly decorative. So, how did they manage to sneak in a little romance? Well, brace yourself, because some of their tricks were clever, some were hilarious, and some, honestly, might haunt you tonight. Back in medieval Europe, going for a walk wasn't always about getting fresh air. Let's say you were living in a thatched cottage with your in-laws, 3 kids, and maybe a chicken or two wandering around. If you wanted to give the young couple some space, you'd gather the family and say, "We're off to check the fields," even if the fields didn't need checking. The polite thing was to disappear for half an hour. And the couple inside, they knew exactly what that half hour was for. Now, here's where it gets awkward. In some tight-knit villages, people timed their walks by how long certain couples usually took. Meaning, everyone basically knew your stamina. Imagine coming back early and awkwardly meeting eyes across the dinner table later that night. In the days before solid walls, people had to get creative. Beds in wealthier homes often had thick, heavy curtains all the way around. They weren't just for keeping warm, they were the original "do not disturb" sign. Some households hung huge carpets or tapestries between beds. And here's the thing: they didn't block much sound, but they did block the view, which meant your siblings could pretend not to notice, while very much noticing. In 16th century France, there's even record of couples doing their business behind an ornate room divider, while other family members kept chatting in the same room. Polite society's version of "just act like you don't hear it." In ancient Rome and later in Ottoman cities, bathhouses were everywhere. People went for hygiene, sure, but they were also perfect cover stories. If you were married and wanted to meet your partner away from noisy, crowded home life, you could, coincidentally, end up in the private rooms attached to some bathhouses. Steam, dim lighting, the sound of running water, honestly, the perfect romantic soundtrack. In medieval Japan, some bathhouses even had back doors for private exits. Let's just say, if your spouse came home smelling too nice, you probably knew why. In Victorian England, discussing intimacy openly was scandalous. So how did couples ask for private time without making grandma faint? Easy: they used medical excuses. Things like "my husband needs a rest cure" or "the doctor prescribed bed rest for my nerves." Translation: we're locking the door and you're not coming in. There's even a recorded case in 1874 where a wealthy London couple took an entire week at a seaside hotel under the guise of treating melancholy. Which is hilarious, because they returned looking very much not melancholy. All right, buckle up, because this one sounds like the setup for a bad joke. In colonial America and parts of Europe, unmarried couples were sometimes allowed to share a bed, with a wooden board between them. Yes, literally a plank running down the middle of the mattress. The idea was to let them talk and bond, without any bonding. Parents thought it was a wholesome way to encourage romance before marriage. But, and this is important, people are incredibly good at working around obstacles. That board, often mysteriously shifted overnight, which means bundling boards probably saw a lot more action than they were meant to prevent. In certain medieval towns, especially in Italy, rooftops weren't just for drying laundry. They were highways for secret lovers. Houses were often built so close together that you could step from one roof to the next. If your partner's parents were suspicious, you didn't sneak in through the front door, you dropped down from the roof, like some romantic ninja. One 15th century account from Florence tells of a man who would signal his lover with a white scarf tied to the chimney. When the coast was clear, she'd toss down a rope ladder. Romeo and Juliet vibes, except with better upper body strength. Religion was a big part of daily life in the past, and sometimes people used that to their advantage. In some rural Catholic communities, couples would claim they needed to pray together privately for fertility blessings. No one dared interrupt something that sounded holy. In ancient India, some couples conveniently extended their temple visits, slipping away into gardens or behind secluded courtyards. It was risky, but also oddly poetic. Imagine incense smoke drifting in the air while you're trying not to get caught by a monk. This one comes from small farming villages in Eastern Europe. Butter churning was a long, repetitive job, and the rhythmic motion masked a lot of noise. Some young wives would insist on help from their husbands in the shed or outbuilding, away from the house. To outsiders, it just looked like hard work. But inside, let's just say the butter wasn't the only thing getting churned. There's even a folk song from 18th century Poland with a not-so-subtle line. She churned for hours, but no butter was made. I think we can guess why. In medieval Europe, annual festivals weren't just about music, mead, and questionable dancing. They were also prime opportunities for couples to disappear. During big celebrations like Midsummer's Eve, villages erupted in music, bonfires, and drinking. No one paid attention if two people slipped into the shadows. Everyone was too busy watching fire-jumping competitions or trying not to trip over their own feet. One 14th century chronicler even hinted that these nights were the real reason for population booms 9 months later. Okay, this one sounds insane, but it's recorded in 19th century rural Ireland. If a couple was newly married but living with a large extended family, the ideal was to have their own cottage. Sometimes, neighbors would help by accidentally knocking down part of the house. Why? Because repairs meant the couple had to stay somewhere temporary, often a small shed or guest hut. They got a week or two of complete privacy under the guise of necessity. And of course, everyone swore it was just a tragic accident. Wink. In certain African tribal traditions, when a newly married couple entered their hut for the first time, the whole community would start singing outside. Not love songs, loud, rhythmic, laughter-filled songs. It wasn't to embarrass the couple. It was to drown out any sounds from inside, giving them the illusion of complete privacy. It's such a fascinating mix of communal involvement and genuine respect for intimacy. You knew everyone was aware of what was happening, but no one would admit it. Before Uber, there were horse-drawn carriages, and apparently they were the 18th century equivalent of the backseat of a car. In cities like Paris and London, wealthy couples would sometimes take very long carriage rides. The driver knew what was happening, the slow pace, the sudden turns into empty side streets, but as long as the fare was good, no one cared. One satirical London newspaper even joked that the suspension springs of certain carriages are worn in a most curious manner. Yeah, we get it. This one's straight out of a spy novel. In the courts of certain Mughal emperors, there were huge, ornate chests and canopied divans in private chambers. Some weren't just decorative, they were designed with hollow spaces big enough for two people. The idea was to hide lovers during surprise visits or palace inspections. But some couples took advantage of the waiting period inside these spaces to make the most of their time. It sounds crazy, but palace intrigue was dangerous. If caught, the consequences were often fatal. Talk about high-stakes romance. Now, this one is legendary. King Charles II of England, known for his very active love life, reportedly had a bed in one of his private chambers that wasn't meant for sleeping. It looked like a regular canopy bed, but it had a secret mechanism that locked the door when the curtains were drawn. This wasn't about protecting himself from assassins. It was about making sure private time stayed private. And here's the kicker. Some historians claim the mechanism could be triggered from inside the bed, so he didn't even have to get up to secure the room. That's commitment. So, how did people in history get privacy for intimate moments? They lied, they faked illnesses, they pretended to churn butter, they snuck across rooftops, hid inside furniture, and sometimes they had an entire village singing to give them cover. We think of the past as prim and proper, but the truth, people have always found ways to make time for love, even if it meant climbing into a hollow couch or bribing a carriage driver to take the long route. Because when it comes to romance, privacy might be rare, but determination, that's timeless.